Hi, my name is Laura, and welcome to my podcast, Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations, and through these discussions, you will hear why 9 times out of 10, the book wins. I'll also share different behind-the-scenes trivia I've discovered in my research, which by learning makes the story all the more interesting. If you love either books, movies, or both, this is the perfect podcast for you. This probably already goes without saying, but there will be spoilers for both the book and the movie in this podcast. So if you plan on reading the book or watching the movie, go do that first, and then come back and listen to this. And now, without further ado, let's get right into it. Hi, thanks for tuning in today. We are talking about The Prestige, a novel by Christopher Priest, published in 1995, and the movie The Prestige was directed by Christopher Nolan and released in 2006. So a quick overview of the movie. We have Alfred Borden and Rupert, aka Robert, Angier. They're two rival magicians who have a feud which lasts years. Borden comes up with an illusion called the Transported Man, and Angier is obsessed with finding out his secret. He initially thinks it must be a twin, but when researching Borden's past, he can find no sign of a twin or a brother close enough in age. Borden tries to lead Angier on a wild goose chase by telling him the secret to his illusion is Nikola Tesla. Angier takes the bait and travels to Colorado to talk to Tesla, which, by the way, they live in England. Much to Borden's chagrin, Angier returns to England with an act that people are calling the best illusion ever to be seen. Borden goes to see it, and using electricity, Angier seems to transport himself from the stage to the back of the theater. And now Borden is the one obsessed, finding out the secret. From here, I'll hold back on saying how things end in the book or the movie because they differ, and so I'll just talk about it as we go on. So my thoughts on the book. The book starts out from the perspective of Borden's great-grandchild, Andrew, I believe is his name. And this part was interesting enough, but it is fairly short, and then it moves on to Borden's diary, which, by the way, the book is a series of diary entries from 4 different people, but primarily Borden and Angier. Once I started Borden's diary, I was hooked. I love the writing style in this section, and from here on out had a hard time putting the book down. I love the way the Borden character writes, and he makes a lot of references to magic as he writes. An example is, let me first consider and describe the method of writing this account. The very act of describing my secrets might indeed be constructed as a betrayal of myself, except of course that I am an illusionist. I can make sure you only see what I wish you see. A puzzle is implicitly involved. So I had seen the movie, but it was long ago enough that I didn't clearly remember it, so the book still had a bit of mystery to it for me. Though as I read along, certain things from the movie would come back to me. But nevertheless, I thoroughly enjoyed the book. When I first started it, I hadn't remembered from the movie that Borden was a twin. And going back and rereading some of it after the fact, when I realized this, you can tell it's written by 2 different people. It's done in such a subtle way, though, that I didn't even notice it initially. It wasn't until I go back. So even if you do know the plot, in some ways it'll make you appreciate the story even more in some ways because you'll catch those things. I also did like that it included a great-grandchild of Borden's meeting with a great-grandchild of Angier's, showing the lasting impact their feud had on following generations. Though there is something in relation to these 2 characters, Andrew Borden and Kate Angier, which confused me, and I still don't know if I totally understand what happened, but we will talk about that at the end. So the movie was directed by Christopher Nolan, and the script was adapted by him and his brother Jonathan Nolan. Fellow British director Sam Mendes wanted to direct, but author Christopher Priest chose Nolan. He liked Nolan's movie Following. His more notable works such as Memento had not yet been released. And Priest also wanted to support an unknown director rather than go with someone who is already well established. Nolan, of course, is now a critically acclaimed director. His lowest rated movie on Rotten Tomatoes has a 70%, which is still pretty high. The Dark Knight has his highest rating on there, but my personal favorite, I think, is Interstellar. Sam Mendes is also an amazing director, of course, but I think with a story with all these twists and turns, Nolan was the better match. So with acting, we have Hugh Jackman, who plays Robert Angier, and he is incredible this and well cast. Christian Bale is one of my very favorite actors, and here he is amazing as Alfred Borden. I don't know what order these movies were filmed, but he and Christopher Nolan obviously had a good rapport with each other because he went on to play Batman. Michael Caine plays the magician assistant Cutter who goes to work with Angier. Caine is perfect in roles such as these, And again, I don't know which was started first, but either this or Batman Begins was the first time Nolan worked with Kane. And since, Kane has played a part in every Nolan movie. I always think that's cool when a director has certain actors that they work with frequently. And onto Scarlett Johansson. She plays Olive, the attractive stage assistant who works for both Angier and Borden. In the book, she was American, yet in the movie they have her be British, which is funny because Johansson is American. So had they stuck with the character from the book, she wouldn't have had to needed to use a fake accent. Although I must say, I was impressed with her accent and it didn't annoy me the way I thought it would. And I do think she's a talented actress and she was well cast here. Rebecca Hall is fantastic as Sarah, Borden's wife. Her character is very tragic in the movie and Hall gives an excellent performance. So since I was just talking about Rebecca Hall as Sarah, I'll go ahead and talk about the differences which were made to Sarah and Julia, Julia being Angier's wife. In the movie, we're introduced to Borden and Angier who are working together, and Julia is part of the stage act. She and Angier are married when we meet them, and in the act, they have Julia tied and put into a tank of water, which she then escapes from. Borden ties the knot around her wrist, and one night she's unable to untie it, and she dies. So this is what starts the feud between the two because Angier blames Borden for the death of Julia. In the book, Julia does help Angier in his career early on in the book, but after an incident we shall talk about next, he no longer has her in his show. They are married and they have some kids, and then while touring America, he meets Olive, and he leaves his wife and kids to be with Olive. Later, Olive is with Borden, and Angier makes amends with Julia, and then in the end, Angier and Julia are back together again. In the movie, we see much more into Sarah's relationship with Borden, as well as Olive's relationship too with Borden. In the movie, we see much more into Sarah's relationship with Borden. In the book, Borden only mentions her here and there, though he does say how happy he was with home life with her and the kids, which, by the way, they have twins. I liked how the movie showed their relationship more, though. In the book, they seem to have been happily married, and neither Sarah nor Olive ever suspect anything in regards to Borden. In the movie, though, they highlight the strain the marriage has on Sarah, and how she can tell there are days when he means it when he says I love you, and days where he doesn't mean it. And in the end, Sarah can't live like this anymore, and she commits suicide in his workshop. So the start of the rivalry, in the movie, as I said, the feud starts when Julia dies and Angier feels Borden is to blame. In the book, when Angier is young, he and Julia work as spiritualists, and these are magicians, but they claim that what they do isn't magic, but is caused by spirits they are talking to beyond the grave, and they are paid to hold seances, and they feel they bring comfort to those who hire them. Prior to this, Borden knew of Angier's name because Angier had letters published in some magician journal that Borden would read, and Angier comes off as very full of himself, and later Borden's aunt or someone has a death in the family and hires a spiritualist. Borden sees the name and realizes that it is the Angier he has read about in the magazine. And, he's young and he feels that spiritualists are hacks. And so after his aunt's seance, he goes uninvited to another one that Angier is at. And during the seance, Borden reveals that Angier is a scam and he reveals his tricks. He then pushes Julia, who is there assisting Angier. Julia had been pregnant, and because Borden pushes her to the ground, she suffers a miscarriage. Borden doesn't realize this, but as time goes on, he does regret his actions. A month after the fact, he writes to Angier and apologizes. Angier, however, is still broken up about the death of his unborn child, and he does not accept the apology. I like this reason for the rivalry more than the one in the movie. When I originally watched this movie, I don't remember being annoyed by the death of Julia. But this time around, it seems so cliche and too over the top that his wife dies, and I don't know, too much of like this romantic tragedy kind of thing. In the movie, they ruin each other's performance. The way they ruin each other's performances are much more dangerous and cause serious harm. The first time Angier, he fires a gun at Borden, causing him to lose 2 fingers. And later, Borden gets back at Angier, like in multiple ways, but one is that he moves this mattress thing that Angier lands on, causing Angier to break his leg when he goes through the trap door and falls on the hard floor. In the book, Angier messes with Borden's act by, he'll stand in the audience and reveal secrets to the trick and other more harmless things. And so neither one does anything that is physically threatening to the other, at least not until the end. And even then, it was an accident. So with Olive, as said, Olive was an American who Angier met while he was touring the USA. The movie makes Angier more sympathetic initially by having his wife die. In the book, though, Angier isn't too sympathetic because he leaves his wife and kids to be with Olive, though in the movie, Angier goes from being a sympathetic character to someone who's just obsessed and not so sympathetic anymore. When he learns Borden's secret, Olive says that it won't bring his wife back, and he replies, "I don't care about my wife, I care about his secret." So clearly he has lost sight of things. Anyway, in the book, Olive moves to England with him, and they are together for 5 years. However, the last couple of years, the relationship has started to dwindle. Then one day, Olive says that she will get him to love her again by working undercover for Borden and discovering his secret and telling Angier, to which Angier agrees. In the movie, he and Olive are happily together when Angier has the idea to have her work for Borden. And Olive is hurt that he cares more about Borden's secret than he does about their relationship. And so she agrees, but from the start, it seems that she has no desire to actually carry out the plan. In both, Borden and Olive fall in love. She does eventually give Angier the secret, but Borden tells her what to tell him. In the movie, she basically gives him Borden's journal. However, Borden writes the journal for Angier, and at the end of the diary reveals that he purposefully gave Angier false information. In the book, Angier does get Borden's journal. However, it isn't until the very end of the book. And speaking of journals, in the movie, while Borden is in prison, he is given Angier's journal, and this too proves to be a trick, and Angier, similar to Borden, knowingly gave it to him and directs his last journal entry to Borden. Whereas in the book, Borden never reads Angier's journal. Only Angier reads Borden's journal. Anyway, in both the book and the movie, we learn that the secret to Borden's transported man trick is that he does indeed have a twin. In the book, when Borden is talking about secrets magicians keep, he says, "Audiences know well that a magician will practice his illusion for years and will rehearse each performance carefully, but few people realize the extent of the prestidigitator's wish to deceive, the way in which the apparent defiance of normal laws becomes an obsession which governs every moment of his life." Borden and his twin brother live the life of one, which is a huge sacrifice to make for a magic trick, but that's how obsessed they were. Another quote reads, "What cannot be guessed at is the effect the secret has had on my life. This is the real reason Angier will never solve the whole mystery unless I myself give him the answer. He would never credit the extent to which my life has been shaped toward holding the secret intact. That is what matters." There's another line that Borden says also in the book, which says, "Magicians protect their secrets not because the secrets are large and important, but because they are so small and trivial. The wonderful effects created on stage are often the result of a secret so absurd that the magician would be embarrassed to admit that how it was done." In the movie, when Angier finds out Borden was a twin, he says how Cutter tried to tell him that, but Angier was convinced it had to be something more complicated. It couldn't be something so simple and easy. Borden replies, "Simple, maybe, but not easy. There's nothing easy about two men sharing a life." The movie then goes on to show the sacrifices they had to make in order to keep their secret, including having to cut the fingers off of one of the twins because the other had had them shot off by Angier. In the book, you can see that living life like this has taken a toll on Borden. At one point in the book, Angier is asking, "Which one are you?" And Borden replies saying that he doesn't know anymore. The movie doesn't go into the psychological effects of living life like this, though. Rather, they show the more tangible aspect of it. Had Nolan gone a different route, he could have delved into the psychological, but that would have been a much different movie. It would have been, I don't know, like one of those trippy, weird movies where someone is losing their mind, I guess, kind of, which I enjoy movies like that. So that would have been interesting had they gone that route. Anyway, I do like, though, how Nolan shows the strain it put on Borden's lives and their relationships. As said earlier, in the book, Olive and Sarah are never shown to suspect anything, so there isn't the relationship drama that there is in the movie. In the movie, Borden has a right-hand man named Fallon, who we learn is his twin in disguise, and they take turns being Borden and being Fallon. In the book, he talks about having a helper, but it isn't his twin in disguise. It's like some older guy, I think. And also his assistant is never kidnapped the way that Fallon is in the movie. So in the book and movie, Angier does a trick of the transported man using a double. The man's name is Root, and though he can be difficult, it goes well with him for a while. At some point, Angier sits down with him, though, to have a stern talk. However, Root knows how important he is, and instead of getting disciplined, he walks away having received a raise. At some point later, though, they do stop doing the act, and Root is fired. In the movie, Root is played by Hugh Jackman himself, and I was fine with this, but they should have used some prosthetics or something on him, because after they clean Root up and dye his hair, he literally looks exactly like Angier because they are both Hugh Jackman, and they just look way too similar. And even if Hugh Jackman is playing the character differently, still it looks like it's his twin. So it's not believable that they found some guy who happens to be Angier's identical twin in a pub. So they should have, like, I don't know, given him a fake nose or done something more to him. Anyway, in the movie, Borden finds Root and gives him ideas to take advantage of Angier and sabotage the act. In the book, it never talks about Borden talking to Root, though, so that didn't happen. So on to Tesla. In both, Nikola Tesla comes to England to showcase what he can do with electricity. Borden and Angier both see him and are amazed. Borden starts incorporating it into his transported man act, which really ups the illusion. Which, by the way, in the movie, they say that Borden isn't a good showman, despite being an amazing magician. But in the book, this wasn't the case. Borden was a great showman as well. The movie does do a good job showing how Borden was the smarter of the two, and he could easily tell how a trick was done, whereas Angier was never good at analyzing another magician's trick. So that's talked about in the book, and the movie shows that really well. Later, Borden lies to Angier and tells him that Tesla is the key to his transported man trick. In both, Angier goes to Colorado to meet Tesla and have him build a machine that can transport someone. The movie and book show that the original object is seemingly unaffected, but later in the book, as Angier is leaving the mountain, he comes across a metal rod Tesla has been trying to transport, and it is identical to the one inside, and they realize it is working. They just need to calibrate where the item or person is transported to. And this, like, exact same thing happens in the movie. It's just with Angier's hat rather than a metal rod. From here, things start to differ from book to movie. In the movie, the machine creates an exact clone, so every time Angier goes in it, it creates two of them. Which, by the way, once you realize the machine made an exact clone, there you go. Now you have a twin. You don't even need the machine anymore. You can just do the act the way Borden does. But either he didn't think of this, or he just didn't want to deal with the work it takes to hide the fact that you have a twin. I don't know. But he ends up killing one of himself each time he performs the act, and that's how he solves the problem. The one that goes into the machine, like when he's performing it on stage, the one that goes into the machine goes through a trapdoor where he falls into a tank of water and is drowned. Meanwhile, the transported version shows up somewhere else in the theater and continues on living life until the next act. In the book, the machine doesn't create a clone. Rather, it recreates him and leaves a dead body in its place. Similar to the movie, he has to find a way to dispose of these dead bodies, but he doesn't have to kill them because once he is transported, the original is just a dead body. Someone online explained it like this. In the novel, the machine works a bit differently than in the film. It doesn't exactly copy a person as they are, memories and personality intact, 50 to 100 feet away from the device's location. Instead, it does in fact transport the essence of the person into a newly created body, leaving behind a seemingly dead husk. These dead husks are what Angier refers to as his prestige materials in the novel. He ends up keeping his prestige materials in his family tomb and notes the date and time and location each one is formed. In the book, it talks about how meticulous Angier is with notes and keeping track of things. Which, by the way, in the book, when it's talking about him putting the prestige materials in the tomb, I was initially sort of confused because I thought that his prestige materials were the Tesla machine. And so the scene he's talking about how it's like really creepy and like disturbing to do, basically. And so as I was reading it, I was like, wait, why would this be so disturbing? Like, I get he's putting them in a tomb, but why is it so upsetting to put his Tesla machine in a tomb? And then I realized that his prestige materials aren't the Tesla machine. It's his own dead bodies. Also, I found it very interesting in the book that Angier initially has a hard time being transported. It's incredibly painful and leaves him feeling depressed after. However, after a certain amount of time, he becomes addicted to the experience, and in his journal it reads, "The wrenching apart of my body has become a pleasure to which I am almost addicted. At first I was disheartened by the images of death, of living in an afterlife, but now I nightly experience my transmission as a rebirth, a renewal of self. In the early days, I was concerned by the many times I should have to perform the trick to keep in practice, but now, as soon as I have completed one performance, I begin to crave the next." And he later goes on to say that he will even turn the machine on in his workshop when no one else is around, and he'll do it just so that he can get that feeling. And so in the movie, Borden wants to find out how Angier does his act, so he sneaks backstage. While back there, Angier is performing his trick and falls through the trapdoor and into the water tank. Borden, of course, doesn't realize that this is done on purpose, and he tries to rescue Angier. However, he is too late, and Borden is then arrested for the murder of Angier. While in prison, he realizes Angier is actually still alive and learns the whole story of what he was doing. And Angier is now going by his birth name, which he came from an aristocratic family, so he is a lord. And he's able to get custody of Borden's daughter because his wife is dead. Borden is aghast that Angier has taken things so far, and in the end, he is helped by Cutter to get his daughter back. So Cutter was not in on what Angier was doing, and he had truly thought that Borden had killed Angier. And so when he finds out the truth, he, like Borden, feel Angier has just gone too far. So in the end, the Borden brother in prison that is hung is the one who had been in love with Olive, and the Borden brother that lives is the one that loves Sarah and the daughter. And so with Cutter's help, he's able to get his daughter back, but not before he goes and kills Angier. In the book, Borden does sneak backstage to find out Angier's secret. While down there, he sees the main part of the engine of the machine that is making it work. Smoke starts coming out of it, and thinking something is wrong, he flips some switch to stop it because he fears it will start a fire. So he stops it when it was partway through the transition, and this causes there to be two Angiers. So the Angier that was supposed to turn into the new Angier is semi-transparent. So the Angier that was supposed to die is like now semi-transparent, though he still has all the strength of a normal human. And so he goes down below and he sees Borden, and Borden is shocked due to the fact that Angier appears ghostly. And he also says that there is a slime on Angier when Angier tries to grab him. But Borden escapes and he runs away, and as he's leaving, he apologizes and he says it was an accident. So Angier's ghost-like clone decides to kill Borden. So one day, while in between acts, he walks through the door to where Borden is sleeping, and he gets on top of him with a knife. This is when he asks which one Borden is, and Borden says that he no longer knows. And quick side note, in the book, you will read about an event that they were both involved in, first from Borden's perspective and then later by Angier's perspective. And I really like this because they wouldn't be an exact reaccountment. Each would remember the event a little different, which was a nice touch and was very realistic. Anyway, Borden is so frightened of Angier, and Angier suddenly, seeing how scared Borden is, makes him realize that he can't kill him, and so he leaves. A few days later, Angier reads that Borden dies of a heart attack, and he feels it must have been his fault for having given Borden such a scare. The Borden that died was the one that was with Olive, so we can assume the Borden who loved Sarah is the one that lived, similar to the movie. And the ghost Angier then decides to go and meet up with his other half. And his other half, though physically looks normal, has become very weak. He is exhausted simply by walking up a couple stairs, and he starts to get very sick, and when the ghostly one meets with him, he is on his deathbed. The two feel complete when they're around each other, and they set up a second bed so that they can be side by side. The whole household knows what's going on, so this isn't hidden from Julia or the kids. Which, how weird would that have been for the kids to... the oldest one, I think they say is 16 or something, but they have a couple of them. But yeah, what a crazy experience to have when you're a kid. But before Angier dies, he hears about Borden's death, and they are able to get his journal. Angier decides that as a final revenge, he will publish Borden's journal. However, to show that he is a true magician, he won't blatantly give away Borden's secret of having a twin. And he knows that one of the twins is still alive because only one died. And so this is his final revenge, that Borden will see that his own journal has been published. So once the more physical Angier dies, the ghostly Angier finishes up getting the Borden book published. And at the end of his own journal, he says that he is going to use the machine to transport himself back into the other Angier's body so that he can be at peace. And by the way, Angier's body is placed in the tomb with the other Angier body/husks. He says he hopes this will allow him to be at peace and officially die. He is worried that it will have the opposite effect and cause the dead part of Angier to come alive once it is connected with the rest of himself, but it is a risk he is willing to take. So when we return to modern day, Andrew Borden was adopted into a different family, and until meeting with Kate Angier, he hadn't known about his great-grandfather. Although all his life he had felt that he must have a twin because he always felt this weird connection to someone in his head/heart. And we learn throughout the book that at the age of 2, Andrew's dad met with Kate's parents as a way to try to confront their family's feud. Kate, being a child herself, witnessed the father showing Borden the Tesla machine, which they still had intact in the basement exactly how Angier had left it. And they argue, and then for some reason, the Angier dad puts the 2-year-old Borden in the machine, and when it turns off, the boy appears to be dead, and the parents pick him up and take him away. Andrew, after hearing this story, later goes into the tomb, believing that that is where he will find his twin. Once he's in there, he sees the multiple bodies of Angier, as well as the body of a 2-year-old boy. As he is in the tomb, he hears someone say, "You're a Borden, aren't you?" Oh, and the boy had the same name tag with the date, time, and event it took place, just like the Angier bodies have, except it's in the 70s, so it's hundreds of years later. But anyway, Andrew runs out of there, obviously, because he's scared, and when he's back in the house, he and Kate see the figure of a man leaving the tomb and walk away. So Angier had been alive all those years, but apparently couldn't escape. So no surprise that no other family members were placed in that tomb, considering, like, the wife and children were aware of what was in there. So it makes sense that the tomb had never been opened because they knew that that was, for Angier and all his bodies, and they put the other family members somewhere else. But what I don't get is who Andrew is in relation to the 2-year-old Borden. So the boy, he would have been transported to the tomb because that's where it was set to be transported, which explains why the body was in there. But then why is Andrew still alive? Like, did the family know he must be alive in the tomb? So they got the live boy out of the tomb, and then placed the dead body in there? But then why didn't Angier escape then when people were in there? Or was he waiting for someone? I don't know. It doesn't really make sense to me. Because the Angier that enters the machine is the one that would die. So the 2-year-old boy would have died, and the living one was transported. And so they must have, I don't know. I don't know if Christopher Priest doesn't explain things because he doesn't want to be the kind of author who holds the reader's hand and walks them through it, or if he didn't think it out clearly and doesn't try to explain it because he doesn't really know. I'm sure it isn't the latter, right? But I don't know. I'm still confused by it. And if anyone reading this has read the book and can make sense of the storyline, I would love for you to message or comment on my post and share your insight. And so with the title, initially one might think that it is named The Prestige because that is what the final act of an illusion is called. With the book, though, it is clear it is given that title because their twin is the prestige of the act. So Borden himself or themselves are the prestige. Then with Angier, he has a prestige twin as well by the end of the book. So book or movie, the book and movie are both interesting because you think you're reading a novel set in the 1800s, 1900s about two feuding magicians. Then unexpectedly, it becomes kind of sci-fi when it introduces the Tesla machine, which does the impossible. I read a review, I can't remember where this was, but they said that they enjoy sci-fi. They just want to know that that's what they're reading. And I could kind of relate to that because I remember watching the movie for the first time back when it came out. And when it shows Angier is performing his act, when it shows how he performs it with the Tesla machine, I had the same reaction. What? This one is supposed to be that kind of movie. And so it almost feels like cheating in some way because it's this movie that seems set in the real world, and yet suddenly this sci-fi otherworldly thing that's impossible is in the story, and it just seems out of place. And when I watched it at the time, that's how I felt. The book, though, I did not have that thought when things took a turn towards sci-fi because I knew it was coming. And I guess Christopher Priest, a lot of his books do kind of have a sci-fi aspect. So if you're familiar with the author, then you wouldn't have been surprised as you read the book that it took that turn. And the book also has this added creepiness in the end that the movie doesn't have. And so I did kind of like that. So the book and movie are both amazing, and I would recommend both. I actually like that Nolan gives you a storyline that is easier to make sense of. Usually the novel is less confusing of the two, but in this case, the book left me with more questions than the movie did. Mainly the modern day part because that story with the young Borden boy. But there was also this whole thing where Angier's obituary is put in the paper before he dies, but both Angiers are surprised to have read it. And Borden didn't do it because he too was surprised when he read it. So unless it was the other Borden twin who did it without the other's knowledge, or maybe it doesn't explain it, or maybe it does explain it and I just missed it. I'm not sure. Anyway, the movie actually explains things better, whereas the book will leave you scratching your head. At least it did with me. And I do like the story of Angier and his wife better in the book, but with Borden, I like that we see more into his relationships in the movie. Though his relationships do come to sadder ends than they do in the book, Though in the book, I mean, Olive has to see Borden die of a heart attack, so that's kind of sad. But the story with Sarah is definitely much sadder in the movie. So I keep going back and forth as to which I like better, but for now, I think I will say that I like the movie better because it does a better job explaining things. But the book is great, and I highly recommend it. It was, like I said, I had a hard time putting it down, and I just couldn't wait to see how it ended. And I love the 4 different perspectives, and each one has a different style of writing, so that's fun. So yeah, highly recommend it. And it made me want to read more books by Christopher Priest. Although it seems like maybe one of his books was turned into a movie, like another one, but now I can't quite remember. But anyway, thanks for listening to today's podcast. Join me next week when I will be talking about the memoir Another Bullshit Night in Suck City, written by Nick Flynn. And the movie adaptation is titled Being Flynn. So join me next week for that one because it's going to be a good one. Thanks for listening. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions, head over to my site, whythebookwins.com. You can leave a comment there and I will be sure to reply. You can also find me on Instagram under the same name, Why the Book Wins, and you can message me there and don't forget to follow. And also don't forget to subscribe to my podcast and join me next Wednesday for the newest episode of Why the Book Wins.